Welcome everyone to today's webinar. This is Gearing Up Your Grant Strategies for 2024. My name is David Gates and I'm the Director of Online Education here at GrantStation, and I'll be your host. And your presenter today is Alice Ruhnke. Alice is the president of GrantStation, and she's raised over $45 million from federal, state, and private grant makers. So she knows what it takes to get funded. And today she's going to talk more about current giving trends and highlight how you can maximize your grant strategies for 2024. So please welcome Alice Ruhnke.
Well, thank you, David, and thanks everyone for being here on this relatively cold morning. I'm in a different spot than usual because my internet thinks it's too cold in my office, and so I am upstairs trying to manage from my living room. However, I think we've got it all straight. So I'm excited that you're here. I think that it's just a really fun time with the new year kind of dawning and looking fresh at the way that we're looking at our grant strategies and ways that we can take the current trends and maximize them to get the most money to support our organization's missions. So where we're going to start today is looking at those giving trends of where different sources, are remaining the same or going up or going down and those kinds of things, just so you can see kind of more, not globally within the US, but how that giving across the country is changing and evolving, which it always does, but we'll kind of see where we're at right now. And how that can kind of help us leverage, this information can help us leverage which strategies we maybe want to invest more time in or invest less time in. We'll also look at how important it is to diversify your funds and look at some different sources that you might want to consider as you're looking at your overall, development plan for your organization, and kind of touch on that diversification. And then we're going to look at in-kind contributions and how you can develop an in-kind contributions to leverage other, giving trends or leverage the way that you're diversifying your funding, and kind of walk through that process and how you can develop that to really increase the capacity of your organization. And then we're going to look at how funders are using diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how that is not just a statement that we write out and then pop into our grant applications, but it's a way that funders are looking at things a little differently now than they used to. And so how funders are looking at that and how you can incorporate strategies into your overall grant seeking calendar and schedule and strategy. And then we have some action steps that you can take from the webinar today and use all automatically. And then we'll have some time for question and answers. So like David said, go ahead and throw those in the Q&A and we will get to those at the end of the session. So each year, the Giving USA organization compiles information on giving in the United States. And 2023 is not available yet. That will be coming out soon. But so the latest we have is 2022 contributions. And it's almost $5 billion that was given from corporations, from bequests, from foundations, and from individuals to nonprofit organizations. So this does not include government money, but it's just more on that private side of corporations, individual giving, foundations, etc. And so just looking at this, chart here, you can kind of see that while for myself as a grant professional, I spent a lot more time writing corporate grants or writing foundation grants, and spent a lot of time there, that really the largest piece of the pie is still coming from those individual donors. So I just want to always kind of make you aware of that. There is nothing wrong with spending time, seeking corporate support or foundation support, but having that, seeing that the biggest piece of the pie is coming from individuals, making sure that you have those strategies in place to secure from, minor donors or, reoccurring donors up to major donors, up to, the biggest area of bequests that we'll kind of talk about a little bit more. And then just to kind of see how this, how these percentages and numbers change over time. Here's some information kind of so you can see what's really interesting is that individual donor base has been declining. And before, I would say 2018, 2019, that number really had not dipped below 70%. But in the last like 3 years or so, that number kind of for the first time has gone down below that 70% mark. Which, again, still the biggest piece of the pie. However, it could be, from just issues around, the pandemic and, loss of jobs and things like that, potentially because of the tax, the redoing of the tax code where people aren't itemizing deductions like they used to. Maybe that's, part of the reason why that individual giving has gone down. But just to kind of, see what the trends are, right? I think that's what's important here. So again, individuals still the largest, however, that is going down. And foundation giving is really creeping up. Foundations are doing very well with the stock market and things like that. And so their giving has continued to increase as a piece of the overall percentage. Then you can see here with bequests. Bequests being when people pass on and they designate some money for your organization. And so that's, maybe growing just a little bit. However, there is what is called the Great Wealth Transfer going on right now. And so over the next 20 years, the baby boomers who are, the largest, cohort out there are starting to retire, pass on, that sort of thing, and then giving those dollars away in two ways. One, to their children and grandchildren, which makes sense. So, the boomers giving that money to, Gen Xers, to millennials, that sort of thing to pass it on in their family. And also a large percent of that also going to charitable organizations. So the dollar, amount that we're talking about is huge with this great wealth transfer. It's $84 trillion is expected to move, from the one generation to the other, and a percentage of that to charitable organizations. So I really encourage you to look at bequests as a strategy in your own giving. Those are generally not short-term plans that you just, develop and then have money in the bank, but they're longer-term plans. And then also not only looking at, gaining that money from, the boomers, putting in their will money for your charitable organization, but then also just looking at the changes in giving from the boomers to, Gen Xers and boomers to millennials, and how those different cohorts give in different ways. And so when we see again that wealth transfer, then all of a sudden millennials and Gen Xers are going to have more dollars to give to nonprofit organizations and charitable organizations. So again, looking at how they give, and again, looking into the future of incorporating the kinds of strategies that engage those cohorts of Gen Xers and millennials. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about corporate giving. You can kind of see here it's stayed relatively flat over time, and I'm going to talk a little bit more and break that down a little bit in a few slides. So again, just kind of seeing the trends of where the giving has gone over the decades and how we can capitalize on what those trends are. So when looking at, different funding opportunities, the rule in nonprofit sustainability is that you don't put all your eggs into one basket, because one funding source goes away and all of a sudden your programs are just left floundering. So looking at those different grant opportunities from foundations and corporate sources, from government sources, and diversifying that funding across your portfolio, to make sure that you're not all in on government grants, which maybe could go away in the future and leave you rather empty-handed. But having these other sources that you can see here, from fundraisers that you do, or individual donors that you have, or larger, planned giving through bequests that you might have strategies for, or earned income streams for your organization. All these things down here really do help you leverage those funds from grant makers. So having, the funds, the unrestricted funds, really helps you to match what the funder is, trying to support. And then you have that additional money to help support and match what you're requesting from those grant makers. So it's really important to have that diverse kind of portfolio for your organization. And one of the things that we have at GrantStation, well, let me just go through kind of why it's really important and then show you a tool that we have. But when you do have those grants, they're a great source of income, right? To help your organization do the work that they do. I'm not saying anything negative about grants. I've worked in that space for 25 years. But when you write a grant, you tell the funder what you need, they give you dollars, and you have to spend those dollars on what you wrote in the proposal. And sometimes it can be really hard to find the money to kind of keep the lights on, cover that overhead expense of your rent, utilities, and insurance, and things like that that you need for your organization. So those unrestricted funds that I was talking about, the second part of the last slide, those are those dollars that when a donor gives you money, usually they give it to you unrestricted. Once in a while, a major donor will give it to you restricted, but usually it's unrestricted. You can use it for whatever, you need for your organization, things that aren't covered by grant opportunities. And then just when things come up and you need to be flexible and take advantage of a new opportunity that pops up, those unrestricted funds really help you to, be able to move nimbly and make changes in your strategies for your nonprofit. So it's really important to have both sets, that those grants can just be great ongoing, infusions of funds. But then having those unrestricted funds are really important to leverage to get those grants and really kind of smooth out your organizational budgets. One of the things, this is a member feature. So if you are a member of GrantStation, we do have a really cool report that you can go in and look at. This is just a screenshot. It's big, it's longer than this, of your grants revenue. But really looking at different ways that you're getting money from either grants or individuals. And you can put your current, budgets here and your projected budgets here, or you could just go right in and say, I'm going to put, what we have for our 2024 budget. And then based on your answers and the kind of diversification factor that you have within your organization, it then gives you recommendations as to how then, potentially, you haven't tapped into local businesses. So then strategies that you can use to tap into local businesses. So a really cool feature that you can use and reuse for your organization with a GrantStation membership to help you with that diversification of funding. Um, and then just kind of, as we're looking at that diversification, that first list that where I had the grants and then the earned income and individual donors and that kind of thing, could have been very, very overwhelming, especially if you're a new or young organization, to look at that list and say, well, we can't possibly do all of that. And that makes perfect sense, that those new organizations are usually, funded through, individual donations from people who care about your cause, looking at in-kind donations, which we'll talk in more depth about. Usually small grants or, from your local community foundations or your local businesses and things like that, and then different fundraising events you might do in the community. Now, these are not set in stone. These don't mean that a new organization couldn't get a larger grant, right? But just kind of what that, kind of typical life cycle is for a nonprofit. Then as you've kind of established yourself, in later years, then looking at those larger grants, looking at having, moving those individual donors to major donors, potentially adding that planned giving or bequest campaign. Again, funding raising events are usually, popular for nonprofits throughout their life cycle. And then again, just depending on what your organization is doing and how you're structured, would a capital campaign to support building or, growth or, endowments or whatever it is that you're looking for. So just kind of seeing that, it is a process. Don't get overwhelmed if you look at those lists and say, I can't do all of that. We're just not there yet. That makes sense, right? So I just want to keep it in perspective as to, ways that nonprofits kind of tend to grow their organizational budgets and such. So one way of kind of growing that organizational budget, in what I think is kind of an easier way, is through an in-kind contributions program. And so in-kind contributions are things that are donated to your organization. It could be materials, supplies. It could be the time of your volunteers and those kinds of things. So no money is really changing hand, but what you're doing is you're really adding to your overall organization's budget by, by tracking and then, sharing information about your in-kind contributions. So some of the benefits of an in-kind contribution, it really kind of helps you boost the bottom line of what your budget figure is. So if you're getting a lot of those in-kind contributions, which we'll talk in more detail about, but if you're getting a lot of those and you're starting to capture them, record them, that sort of thing, then all of a sudden your organization's bottom line really goes up, which means that, potentially you're eligible for, different kinds of grants. That maybe a funder would say, we only want organizations who have been established and, have certain, income like levels. And so it really can help boost that. When we're looking at private and government grants, excuse me, having the in-kind support, if there's a required match, the funder will tell you if it has to be a cash match, but a lot of times it can be that in-kind support. So that can really help you, be more competitive for those government and private grants. And then sometimes just developing those relationships first with an in-kind donation program. Then you develop that relationship with that foundation, with that corporation, with whatever kind of agency you're going after. And then you might be, because of that relationship, then you can springboard from the in-kind donation program at that corporation or organization and move to more of their formal grant programs. So there's a lot of good reasons to really develop an in-kind contributions program. So some of the ways of looking at in-kind contributions, probably the the one that most of you will automatically identify with is the volunteer support. And so as I go through, I'll talk a little bit more about tracking. All of this information has to be tracked. But each year, the independent sector, which you can follow this link, determines the value of a volunteer hour. They do it state by state, and then they do it for the US overall. And so if you're tracking volunteers and the work that they do or the service that they provide to your organization, like it was a staff member with a timesheet and things like that, you can start to value their time at, let's say you have a statewide program, or within one state, usually you'd be using just the number in your own state. But looking at $26.67, for example, in West Virginia, and you start to add up the hours of all your volunteers and how they're supporting your organization, you're going to find that that kind of bottom line number goes up pretty fast. I mean, most of us do use volunteers. And again, if we're tracking this information, then we can use that volunteer support to leverage other grant dollars, show that in-kind support to your organization. So that's if a volunteer comes in, kind of supports your organization as, a volunteer. Sometimes you'll have professionals volunteer within your organization. So maybe you have a senior center, and once a month a nurse comes in and provides blood pressure checks and wellness visits and that kind of thing for your participants, and that nurse is doing nursing duties, and that person is a nurse. Then you can use the occupational employment and wage statistics from the Bureau of Labor to categorize what their professional rate is. So if the nurse, if the professional rate is, $60 an hour, then you would again get that in writing and get, you would track the time, but you could use that professional service that they're providing. Now, if the nurse comes in and, serves food, to the seniors, then the nurse would just be at the regular volunteer hour. But if the nurse comes in and he's doing his nursing duties, then you could value it at that. So just again, a really kind of fast way to show additional support coming into your organization, even though no money is actually changing hands with this. Another way to look at in-kind support is if you get any product donations. So if people are bringing in food to your food pantry, or bringing in, providing food to your after-school program, or, providing products to the seniors at the senior center, then you can get the calculation of what the value of that product donation is. Again, as long as you're tracking, those are, support to your project coming in, that just, again, no money's changing hands, but it's actual support that's really aiding in your programs, right? So there's a value to it. So kind of calculating the product donations or any discounts that you get. So if you, let's say you work in an office building and you get that discount, the city provides you with that rent space for $10 a year or something, or a month, then you can look at what the fair market value is of that space and provide the difference in the discount that you're getting, again, as an in-kind donation. Or if you go to, Staples and you need technology and you need computers, and they're providing you with $200 off each computer, then you can use $200 for each computer that you purchased as match. Again, so you're just getting those discounts or those donations in writing of what you've received. Again, really adding to your bottom line. I want to share a little bit when, we saw kind of in the trends the corporate giving, and it's kind of stayed flat over the time period that we were looking at. One of the things that's kind of interesting with corporate giving is that one of the trends is that instead of them giving real dollars, and increasing the dollar amount that they're giving through their corporate giving programs or, things like that, that they're giving more of this in-kind support. And of course, we want the dollars, right? I mean, obviously, really want those dollars from those corporate providers. But if they're providing these other things to organizations, and that can help you so you don't have to raise money to do these things otherwise, then really capitalizing on the way corporations are giving more in-kind support is a really good strategy. So again, they're giving more of their goods, if it's, office equipment or copiers or computers or furniture, things like that to the nonprofit sector, especially with a lot of those corporations, people not coming back to work in the office. A lot of those places are really looking to now kind of downsize their own things and giving those products or, goods away. So one strategy that you can look at. Another one is kind of looking at those services of them giving you potentially space in, their now less used office space, or providing, they will, do some administrative work for you, and the front office person will, route your mail and answer your phones and things like that. So if they're giving those services, is a less that you have to then raise to hire somebody to do those things or to pay that rent. And then finally, probably the biggest change is in the expertise of their employees, where they're giving more time for their employees to go out and spend time with the nonprofit community and use the expertise that they have in their different areas, for the nonprofits. So people, financial people from a corporation doing some tax work or doing audits or something for a nonprofit organization, or letting their marketing people come out and help you do a marketing campaign and redoing your website, your logo, and all of those kinds of marketing and social media development that you're doing, and letting their planners come out and helping you with your strategic planning and things like that. So again, if you can get that support from those corporations in kind, then you don't have to raise those funds elsewhere. So again, just looking at, again, what the trends are, and then how you can capitalize on what's going on within corporate giving to support your organization. So different ways to find that in-kind support. One of the ways is to kind of look at what you already are getting as in-kind support. So really looking at your overall organization, really going through it with a fine-tooth comb of all of the things that you need to run your organization and where potentially you're already getting that support. So already seeing that, the rent is paid for or it's reduced cost, or already seeing where you have those volunteers coming in that you could start to develop the strategy to record that and start to put that in your overall budgets. Another good way to do that is to look at different brand names of things that your organization is using. So potentially, you're using iPads for some sort of outreach program in the community. So looking at Apple products and looking at Apple product donations would be a strategy that you'd want to use. And in our databases, when you do have a membership, we have those corporate giving, corporate donation programs, and both. We have corporate giving and corporate donation programs. So you can seek out if, you work with animals, and look and see if PetSmart has a product donation service that you can start to investigate and look at. Then also just, identifying within that in-kind support, looking at what your partners are providing to your organization. So you may have partners that are providing maybe services to your participants, getting the value of what those donations are as well, again, really adds to your bottom line. So I would really look at, these things as a starting point to start to build kind of what you already have, and then layer on new products that you could get donated, again, say through an Apple um, product donation program or something like that. Then I also want you to check out these 3 organizations that are also in GrantStation's database. TechSoup helps provide that technology and software resources for nonprofits. And so it's a product donation of those software systems. So a great, you can sign up for free, get those products at a really reduced cost. And then again, that product donation can be used, what you saved as part of in-kind support. And then both Good 360 and the National Exchange for Industrial Resources, or NEIR, I see it a lot as, those 2 organizations have product donations where, again, you can go in, you can sign up on their website for free. And some things you might have to purchase, but some of them are completely donated. But even if you have to purchase them, they're at a really low rate. So looking at where you could get those office supplies, the school supplies, if you're doing housing work or repairs, a lot of times they have those kinds of things that they get. So look at all of those to see how you can tap in to those kinds of product donations to see how you can add to your bottom line and leverage, where you already are. So the other really, really key part with these in-kind donations is that it all has to be trackable. All right. So this isn't just something that you can just willy-nilly start to write down numbers or, make up how many volunteer hours you have and those kinds of things. You really have to track these. These are trackable things. So start by developing what your gift acceptance policy is. If you don't have one, look at what other organizations have done and how you can develop your own. So you could say, for example, I will take donations of money, stock, products, and, volunteers, but I will not take as gifts cryptocurrency, or I will not take money from, let's say you were a youth, from tobacco companies, if you were doing some work, around, healthy communities or something. So you wouldn't take money from certain places. So really look at what you will accept and what you won't accept and get that in writing and get your entire development team on board with kind of where your organization has the capacity to deal with things and where they just don't. Because sometimes somebody might donate a house to you and you don't have the capacity to flip that house, right? So I don't want the house. That's not going to help me. That kind of thing. So really getting laid out what your organization has the capacity to accept or not accept. Then looking at anything that you have gotten, when you look at donations, when you look at discounts, when you look at in-kind services or anything like that, getting that information in signed letters from the donor, from whoever gave you if it was a corporation or if it was a local business or whatever, getting signed letters of what they provided to you. And then tracking, when we're looking at the volunteer hours, tracking that with timesheets, just like you would do an employee, having that information kept for your organization as an auditable trail. And then setting up different tracking forms, that you could then track all of your in-kind donations. So setting up, it could be in an Excel spreadsheet if you're, small. It could go to a more robust system later on as, your organization develops. But, who did you get the donation from? What specifically did you get? And then how are you valuing that donation? The trick is to be very consistent in that. So different places like Goodwill or the Salvation Army or like TurboTax have ways that you can value different product donations. So let's say you got, products of clothes and things like that from individuals, or or something like that. You could use that value technique of either, we're always using Goodwill's database or we're always using TurboTax, but just make sure that you're consistent in using the same system, every time. Don't one time use one and one time use another. Keep it consistent. And then, who on your staff is really, helping you track this and having more than one set of eyes on this so that that it's very legitimate, how things are working, has that kind of checks and balance system. But once you set up that system, it really will help your organization really show that you have more support coming from other places, really, that you can then leverage to get bigger grants, to reach out to new funders, to match different opportunities and things like that. So now we're going to move into our final section here. Let me go back. Looking at how, I'm sorry for this cough. Let me just get a quick drink here. Looking at how grant maker trends in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and where some grant makers, since the pandemic, since a lot of the Black Lives Movements matter, since a lot of things, going on, especially a couple years ago, some people went back to doing business as usual, right? Some actually changed the way that they were looking at funding. And so these are some of the ways that a lot of funders have changed, or the way that they're looking at things a little bit differently. And so I'm really happy to see that this, wasn't just kind of a papered over movement, but a real shift in the way grant makers are working, which will help in the shift of how our nonprofits are working. So we'll go through kind of how some funders are doing this differently. Some of these have a lot of the same threads running through them, so they're not necessarily all separate types of, trends, but just different ways that funders are looking at giving and how we can show our own diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we're doing that work in our communities. So to kind of start with that, building movements, grant makers are interested in kind of building those movements. And when we think of that, we tend to think pretty big, the climate change, movement, Black Lives Matter movement, big nationwide, worldwide things going on. But it doesn't have to be when you're looking at building movements. So your community, your town, your city could build a movement around healthy engagement of healthy communities, and start to look at how you bring together groups from the farmers to the schools to different groups, healthcare agencies, those kinds of groups, how those groups will work together to build a more healthy movement for, a movement towards healthy lifestyles in your community, right? So what that really helps you, one way that you can really do that is to look at what the kind of root causes of some of the problems are in what you're addressing. So again, if you're looking at unhealthy communities, part of it could be, unhealthy eating habits, it could be unhealthy lifestyles, it could be a lack of information or lack of access to healthy foods. So there's a lot of reasons around that. So looking really, broadly at who you can involve in that movement to move from just one, diabetes education program to a larger healthy lifestyles kind of movement within your community. Funders are becoming more interested in seeing those kinds of initiatives. So looking a little bit broader at what you're doing. A second way is developing leaders, that funders are looking more at developing leaders within your community, and not necessarily just the traditional leaders, that really working with what your communities looks like, what your community's demographics are, and really making sure that your initiatives have the input of the people in your community that you serve, and how you develop those leaders, especially those people who don't maybe consider themselves a leader, but could be a really important part of developing your programs so that they are the most impactful. And those that are the target population, the target population is usually the best people to go to see how to develop your programs in a way that's effective, and they will tell you. So really developing leaders and including those that you serve in the design of your programs, you're going to see that kind of flavor throughout a lot of these different areas in the diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how funders are really looking at how you're doing this work. Another thing that's really interesting before I go on to the rest of the topics is that funders are also putting more money to help organizations develop the capacity to do these things. So develop the capacity to build movements or develop leaders, or the other ones that we'll talk about. So again, within GrantStation's databases, you can search just for capacity building money. For example, if you were working in this area and you need some planning money to make these things kind of happen in your community. And those capacity building funds are more available than they were 2 years ago, certainly. So I think it's a pretty exciting time. Grant makers are also interested in shifting those cultures and really changing kind of belief systems, behaviors, outcomes in communities. One of the ways that I can think of that I've worked within that shifting culture is like around stigma issues around individuals with substance use disorders. That sometimes those shifts in culture need to come within the healthcare systems themselves. So even the providers need some of that stigma education to help them serve the target population better, in addition to the general, community, stigma that goes on with substance use disorders. So there can be different ways that we think to shift that culture, to really make that difference in the lives of the people that we serve. So again, it could be internal shifts to the services that are provided, or external to your communities in general. Then developing an inclusive democracy and economy. So, grant makers again are interested in really creating where the people who need the services most are involved in the design of the program, that your programs are equitable financially for individuals, and also kind of looking at environmental issues, that we're paying attention to what if that that has and what we do has an impact on the environment, really looking at how we're protecting the environment in those kinds of issues. But again, I think this one does also translate back to that, are we including those that we serve in the design of our programs and helping communities develop their own strategies, and individuals develop their own strategies for change. And are they involved in that process? Then defending democracy. Again, you're going to see more funders that are, putting up dollars and having, grant competitions and providing support for looking at democratic issues, little d democratic issues, and really helping to see that people have access to voting rights and people have access to their voices being heard and things like that. So again, this could connect right back to the individual participants themselves. It could be back to the movements themselves that you're building, or building those individual leaders. But we are seeing more funders really looking at promoting democratic, again, little d values. And then two more kind of issues. Again, you're probably starting to see how these things are overlapping, but just that collective impact, which is kind of tied to building movements, but really where it could just be more of a collective effort. So maybe it's not a whole movement, but it's a collective effort where different organizations are coming together to address a shared agenda, looking at measurements in the same way, and what is changing in the communities, and measuring that in a shared way, where people are truly working together in a win-win situation that only creates that win for the community and the people that we serve. And kind of having that ongoing communications between the partners, with strong leadership. So again, really looking at how we're working together, how we're working collaboratively or collectively to address some shared causes in our community. And then finally, the last kind of topic here, just being that true diversity, of really seeing that again, that our organizations look like our target populations, they look like our communities, that we're including everyone in our programs. And really trying to get that diverse perspective as we're putting things together, and not kind of doing things for the community, but how do we help the community help change things itself? And again, that true diversity will be natural by including the people in your community to do the design of your programs, have that input in how you're doing things. And again, really cultivating the empowerment of everyone in your community to have a voice. So again, none of these are really separate things. You can see the themes running through them. But these are the things that, again, a funder, when you get a question in, say, a grant application, or a donor asks you a question, about your diversity and equity and inclusion, it's not about just writing out what that statement is that you've hopefully developed for your organization. It's more about how you actually do the work, how you're living out those principles, which I love that that's really the trend, right? It's not just about creating a paragraph about DEI and then, having it on your website. It's like, how did your organization change to be more inclusive or more diverse or include others? Or work with various partners, those kinds of things. How did you structurally do things differently to make things more equitable? And so I like that this movement has not lost any momentum. So I'm finally kind of coming to the end of our presentation, but some things that you could immediately just take today and move with is, first to identify, look at those diverse funding streams, look at how you're funded currently, how you could look at additional ways to fund your organization given the trends. looking at those in-kind contributions and starting, if you've not done it before, set up those policies and procedures to start to collect this information. How is it going to happen within your organization? You don't have to start from scratch there. You can look at the way other organizations have set up in-kind contribution programs and adapt it to your own. Then setting up that system of how you're going to track it, because that's really key, that you have that trackable system set up. And then looking at how you are incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion in your programs, and how, it's how it's being, played out on the ground, and how you can communicate that information to funders and donors about your organization. So these are some big, first steps, but first steps that you can take to start to use this information the minute that you walk away from this webinar. So I'm going to take another drink of water and bring David back on, and we can do some questions and some answers.
Yeah, perfect. All right. So there's quite a few questions already. One that kind of came up a few times where people were wondering, do you have any information about the cost of volunteer services in Canada?
Oh,
I looked and I couldn't find
I
it
do
directly,
not,
yeah.
but we do have, so we have a Canadian database with as part of our membership, and we have a Canadian researcher. And so I will ask Ashlyn about that, and when we send the recording out, we will we'll put that answer in there.
Okay, perfect. That is great. Yeah, so we'll include that for everyone who was asking about that. And then Beth asked, is there a movement for foundations to provide grants for unrestricted purposes? Do any of them understand that you have to keep the lights on?
I know. And so, Beth, that is a great question. I think that, during the pandemic, kind of for the first time, all of a sudden funders were like, yeah, you guys, need money just to operate, right? Just to keep the lights on. A lot of funders, kind of went back to business as usual. But I think that there is, more of a movement. More funders have started to really look at what a nonprofit organization needs. And a lot of times that need does come with those unrestricted dollars, or, overhead dollars, or whatever term it is. So I'm still going to say that most funders are probably still kind of operating in the old-fashioned way. But I think past the pandemic, more funders are starting to look at more of this kind of trust-based philanthropy, and kind of saying, hey, listen, if I'm funding you, we're going to develop a relationship. I'm not going to micromanage if this is spent on, utilities versus, supplies. I trust you, to make those decisions for your organization. So there's a trend, in the right direction there, but it's still probably going to be challenging. Still, we're maybe getting some of those unrestricted dollars through fundraisers, through donations of, individual donations or major donations, probably is still going to be a pretty top strategy in that.
Okay, perfect. Then there were quite a few questions about what can be considered a volunteer. So just a couple in the Q&A. One was from Ivy saying, can you count your time as a volunteer if you're not drawing a salary? And then Jacqueline asked, can committee members be considered volunteers? Our committee members are paid by their respective organizations to be involved, so I assume they're not considered volunteers. Would those be kind of direct situations, or is there a bit of nuance there?
Right. So for Ivy, when you were like just volunteering for your organization, so let's say you're an unpaid staff member, unpaid staff. So you're essentially a volunteer, right? So yes, your time tracking it could be used at that volunteer hour, because that's part of the cost of the program, even though no money is taking place, exchanging hands. So, your time of what you're doing to, work within the organization, yes, your time could be definitely categorized as volunteer hours. With committee members, So it kind of depends, like your board members and committee time of your board cannot be considered in-kind donations. But sometimes, like if you were partnering with an organization, and so let's say you had a committee of 10 different sectors involved in a project, and they were all coming to your committee meetings, you could get in writing what the value of their time is, and add it to that project, because again, they might be getting paid on their end, but they're providing your organization with that time. So you can, use those kinds of dollars usually within, different projects that you're doing. So that's where, like, if somebody from another organization is helping and providing support to your organization, then you can use that as an in-kind donation.
Okay. And then kind of bouncing off of that, there were a few questions about if the volunteers get stipends. Does that start to complicate things further? I kind of said you might need to talk to an accountant at that point.
Yeah, I would think so. There are some rules about that. I don't know. I don't know, from a I'm not a financial person. From that level, but that's where it starts to get fuzzy. So I would work with an accountant to get that. Can you use the difference? Maybe, you pay them, $100 a semester, but they're spending, 20 hours, can you use the difference? I would check with a financial person on that.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best idea. Then there was another question in there about, sorry, let me scroll up. What is the best way to determine the value of in-kind product donations, including used items?
Yeah, so that's where I would use like the Goodwill. Goodwill has like a used product thing, or I think the Salvation Army has one, and then also usually like your TurboTax, those kinds of systems sometimes have those embedded in them as well. So just use that, because it would be like, this was a lightly, we got this furniture, it was in good condition, or, slightly used or poor condition, like that kind of thing. You can judge based on what, like when I had an office at one point, and then when I quit the office for my for-profit, then I gave the furniture to a nonprofit, and then I just put, what it was, and then they put the value as that it was in good condition, and went to Goodwill's site and had their value.
Okay.
Yep.
Sense. Then a question from Maria saying, what types of job titles can typically go under capacity building?
So there's no particular like job titles. Usually with capacity building, what you're doing is building the structures within your organization to do your work more effectively or more efficiently. And so, an example of that would be that usually a capacity building grant would allow you to buy an inventory system and train your staff to use an inventory system in a food pantry, because that would help you provide your services better. But it's not going to provide money for that staff member to run the food pantry or to put food on that food pantry shelves, because that's an ongoing expense for your organization. So there's no, set title. It's just what your project is. Are you building your board? Are you developing your strategic plans? Are you developing a fundraising plan, a marketing campaign? What are those systems that you're building to provide services better?
Okay, perfect. And then one other question, just to clarify for some of our Canadians here, with some of these different giving trends, are there any big differences between the US and Canada in these?
I'm sorry, Canada, I don't have those answers. So I think I will run back to Ashlyn on that one as well and see, is there like because that's Giving USA is the group. So if we can find information on, is there a Canadian equivalent?
I did find the equivalent and I shared it. I would have to
Oh, great.
find
Okay.
it again where that link
And
was.
now that I know that, I will also add it the next time I do the presentation.
Let me
So
see if I can find it
I
for everyone.
appreciate that.
Yes, we do have a link for that one here
Okay.
because we had a lot of questions there.
Okay.
Okay, but we will find that for all of the Canadians here.
Yep.
And then I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
But there are quite a few different people working at small organizations who are looking for just kind of advice on how to get started. But I think Jean had a good one with any advice specific to small one-person operations in finding or managing these types of donations.
Yeah, so I do think, Jeannie, with that, it is harder, but potentially finding a volunteer to help you could be a way to start to get some of the volunteer donations, and then having that person start to explore again, number one, what currently exists, and then number two, starting to go into looking at tech soup if you need software or computer hardware, looking at Good 360 if you need product donations, and start to explore, or looking at maybe local businesses and what they can provide. So maybe having a volunteer to kind of help you with that could be a good way to get started. Because you as a one-person operation is probably running the programs. And so, putting on a whole nother layer is super, super challenging. So maybe something like that would be a good idea to get you started.
Visit GrantStation to see our latest online education offerings in the form of live webinars, interactive workshops, and on-demand learning. GrantStation.com, your fast track to funding and online education.